Today's webinar is funded through the Australian Government Future Drought Fund, Farm Business Resilience Program, and ACT and NRM were really lucky to secure funding back in 2020 and for a pilot project, and then we were lucky to receive further funding, which then takes the program up to June 2025. So the program's sort of been going for a number of years now, and we've been holding a lot of extension work and a lot of training opportunities, face-to-face events, and of course we did quite a lot of webinars throughout COVID, and we have continued on some of the online training as well, because it does fit a lot of people's busy programs. But largely the Australian government, okay, no worries, Ruth. Largely the Australian government was sort of setting up this program in particular to help farmers, farm managers, and any staff that are working on farms as well, to have access to subsidised learning and training, practical help with such things as strategic farm business planning. So we've run some extensive coaching training, which is individual one-on-one coaching with what are we up to? Up to 6 rural landowners now. We've done, workshops and webinars on how to understand decision-making processes, farm diversification opportunities in the ACT, new farming practices and techniques, succession planning, and like a whole lot of things. And we're really finding positive results out of all this extension work that we've been able to provide to the ACT. And today's webinar and the series of webinar is part of that program, and it really starts to pull together everything that we've been delivering. And we're really grateful and thankful that the Future Drought Fund does allow us to share it with our New South Wales neighbours, because at the end of the day, we're all in the one landscape and we've all got the same sorts of issues and problems. So that's pretty much it from me. I'll hand over to David. I'll just quickly let you know, and you've probably seen that we do record the sessions, and David and Caitlin are particularly great with the Zoom platform, and where necessarily, particularly in the Q&A sessions, we'll actually stop the recording. So it's an opportunity for you to be in that sort of safe space and ask whatever questions you want. And don't be shy and don't be nervous, ask away, and that sort of information won't go up on the YouTube channel, which is where the recording will go. And throughout the session, if you happen to jump in and ask questions, we can also edit those out. So don't feel that because the session's been recording that it's better for you to sit there and not ask questions if you've got something that you want to ask. I'm pretty sure David would be quite happy for you to put your hand up or interject, whatever. So I just wanted to stress to you that no personal information will be shared on any publicly available platform. Yeah. Okay, well, that's it for me. I'll hand over to David and Caitlin. I'll sit here on mute. But of course, if you've got any questions, stick it in that chat function, and Mary and myself and Caitlin will be able to help, and possibly even David. But enjoy the session, and thank you so much for coming along.
Thanks, Jenny. Good day, everybody. Good afternoon. Just reinforcing what Jenny just mentioned there, I would much prefer to have interaction. Just talking to a screen is it gets pretty old pretty quick, so I'd much rather. This is why we're doing a live session rather than just doing a pre-recorded and sending you a recording, so we get the opportunity to have some dialogue there, and any discussions that you want to bring up or thoughts or comments, jam them in. Thank you to Bruce and Nina for having your cameras on. It's much nicer to be able to see, put a face to the names that we've got there, and great to have the others of you online as well. Thank you to Jenny and ACT NRM for bringing this together for us. It's great. It's really exciting to be able to come and spend a bit of time with you on these few different topics. So we're going to cover a few. So my role in RCS is Chief of Delivery. I'm based in Yeppoon in central Queensland, or that's where my mail gets sent, is probably more specifically, as I cover most of Australia, Tasmania, New Zealand, which is a really fortunate position to be in, to see a bit of different country. What we're going to be focused on today is talking about really decision making. So we're talking about people and how to get the best out of people, this topic itself could go on for 20 years and we still wouldn't quite cover everything, would we? It's such a big topic. So we're going to cover a few things, and where this conversation with Jenny and Mary and the ACT and RM team started was when you were looking down the barrel of potentially missing another spring and things being a bit tight. Well, how do we make better decisions? How do we work ourselves through challenging times? And so I wanted to keep with that decision-making theme. So what we're going to talk about is, first of all, just what is involved with decision-making. What are the 4 pillars of your agribusiness? And that sets the framework for this 4-part series that you're going to be going through. I wanted to introduce you to the RCS professional management model. And that gives you a bit of a framework for decision-making, and also to look at what you might need to get to be more effective with your decision-making. We're going to have a bit of a look at our brain under stress. So when we put under stress, what's actually going on physiologically for us? And finishing off with a few little strategies on how to get unstuck to achieve momentum, which links back into what happens with our brain. So let's kick in and we'll pull up for questions as we go. If anyone's got any questions, please put your hand up as you're going, or you can put it in the chat and we'll keep an eye on the chat as well. So whatever works for you, but I'd love to hear from you. Decision-making is central. And looking at some of the faces I've got here, I'm sure that you've made a few million decisions in your life, and some of them have worked out well, and some of them you wish you could go back and have your time again. And that's the reality of making decisions, isn't it? That's just part of that journey. It's worth just emphasising that decision-making is central to good management. So we can't get to a position where we don't make decisions. We need to be making decisions. And if you're a decision maker in your business, then there's a responsibility that comes with that. And so we've got to be thinking about what we do. So I've got a question for you. What do you, or previously, what have you found difficult about decision making? So what do you, or what have you found difficult about decision making in the past? So some of the things that just came up in our little discussion there was around when you got multiple decisions to make. So we've got decision fatigue. We've got just sticking our head in the sand, and that's it, going and fixing the back fence or going and find something else that really would be good to do and probably needs doing, but it's a little bit less stressful potentially to deal with. Having enough information available to make the decision, which I would say usually links back to the confidence behind decision making. Pardon me. And then we've also got just that beautiful thing about hindsight. So what if if I sell now, what is the market going to go up in the future? Is it going to come down? Is it going to rain? Is it not going to rain? And in ag, they have a big impact on us. So all these things, they make it quite difficult. And it leads to this state of indecision, doesn't it? You know, I'm going to talk a bit about how not making a decision is actually worse than making a decision. And it's a lot more costly. So we need to back ourselves with this. And let's think, so what do we actually need to make good decisions? And there's a few things we'll talk about. I'd actually say, and this is particularly in agriculture, the first thing we need is a bit of confidence. Because there's so many factors that we cannot control that have such an influence over the outcomes that we see and we achieve, it's easy to get caught in that indecision and go, well, what if I'm right? What if I'm wrong? What if it rains? What if it doesn't rain? What if the market kicks? And then we get caught in this little cycle of indecision as a result of that. So I think the first thing we do need to do is just back ourselves in terms of making decisions. And I want to just put this in your heads when it comes to decision making, is that I'm yet to work with anybody that makes a bad decision today. And I'm specifically talking about business decisions in this area here. You don't make a bad decision today. I haven't worked with anybody anywhere in the world that sits there and goes, you know what, I'm going to go and do this, and I know I'm going to lose $250,000 as a result. It just doesn't happen, does it? You don't make a decision knowing you're going to lose money. When something might become a bad decision, or maybe not the best decision, is only when you've got the benefit of hindsight. It's only actually when you're looking back on that decision from some point in the future, when all of those unknowns around what seasons, markets, production rates, people, when all of those factors come in, become known, that we'd actually look back and go, yep, maybe I could have done something different. But it's important to know that when you make a decision today, you're making it with the information that you have, and it's the best decision you can make with the information you've got. And I think that's really important to reconcile in our heads, because we can really make a mess in our heads of talking ourselves in and out of things. And the worst thing is going back and bashing ourselves up about a decision that we've made without being really honest and thinking, well, actually, at the time, we felt it was the right decision for this reason. Now, one tip you can use with this is to actually write down, if you've got a big decision, not going to do this with whether you go and muster that paddock first or go and fix that fence. If you've got a bigger business decision that you're looking to make, you can make a decision log and actually just in your diary or somewhere write down what the decision was and put down the reasoning behind it, just a few dot points for why you decided to do that as opposed to the alternative. Because regardless of what we say, our memory does fail us at times, doesn't it? When we're making these decisions, it's critical that we make them now, as in the present. Because we've got the past that's there behind us and we know what happened in the past, and we've got the future which is coming up, and that's all the unknowns that we don't know. And we quite simply cannot predict what's going to happen there. So what we need to think about is looking back, what lessons can the past tell us? What wisdom, what experience, how can that support you in your decision making? And then thinking about looking ahead in the future, and we talked about the unknowns with what's coming up there. And we can't predict the future, so don't try and predict the future, but just think through what might happen. And I'm a big fan of scenario planning. So if the market goes up, how will I feel about this decision now? If the market goes down, how will I feel about this decision now? If it doesn't rain by this date, how will I feel about this decision? So you're thinking about your decision in a range of scenarios and working out which decision puts a bit of a floor in your risk. And this is an important one. We need to, I think a lot of businesses I see, they're so focused on catching every opportunity that's out there. These little 1%ers all over the joint there. And it's all focused on how we increase things. I think it's also just as important to put a floor in your risk. So how do you actually, with whatever the future brings you, how do you set yourself up for a win, whether it doesn't rain by this date or whether the market doesn't kick or goes up, that you're actually setting yourself up so that you don't lose out big. And if you think through your decisions in terms of that scenarios about what might happen instead of what will happen, it actually becomes a lot more freeing because you're not trapping yourself in this space of trying to predict what is going to happen. And I love this little quote here by Seneca, who's one of the Stoics. So lived a little while ago. You can see the date. And he's got this old quote that comes from these translations that life is very short and anxious for those who forget the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. So we need to learn from the past. It's there giving us some lessons. We need to live in the present, and we need to consider what might happen in the future, but make your decisions in the now. Which leads us into this indecision state again, this decision paralysis. You know, what button do you press? Which decision do you pull the trigger on with what's going around you? And I mentioned before that not making a decision is extremely costly. And the first thing that it costs you is a lot of time. And I would argue that time is probably your most valuable resource. It's the most valuable thing that you've got. You know, we spend so much time protecting our money, protecting our assets, protecting our reputation. But I sometimes feel like we use our time as if it's endless. And it's just not, isn't it? And most of your to-do lists would probably reinforce that. So it costs you a lot of time being in that indecision. It costs you a lot of energy as a result, which is a finite one. It's a really important resource, our personal energy. And as a result, it does end up costing you a lot of money. Now, if you're not making a decision in your business, who is? And the reality is probably nobody or somebody external to your business that might not have the same vested interest as you. So I'd suggest it's really important to not give away your ability to be in control. You might not like making decisions. You might not enjoy it, and they're definitely not always easy. However, if you're in business or there's just one of the things with life, there's something that we need to do. So how do we get better at this? How do we make questioning or making decisions easy? The first thing I'd suggest, and this is a really simple step, is just to clarify what is the question that you're trying to answer. Because most decisions are, do I do this or do I do A or do I do B? That's the question, isn't it? So what is that question? Now, if you can't put it as a question, you're going to really struggle. So what's the question you're trying to answer? And I'd really encourage you to write it down. You really change your relationship with your thoughts when you put your thoughts down on paper. Now, I'm going to say that nearly everybody will have a back of an envelope or a notepad or a piece of paper or a newspaper lying around and a pen. So we've got this technology at hand. We don't need an app. What we just need to do is write down what is the question I'm trying to answer. And my experience is that if you're struggling to write down and clarify the question, then that's central to why you're having trouble answering it. Because when it's in our head, we tend to go around in circles and actually not get clear on what it is that we're trying to do. So put it on paper, change your relationship with what it is, clarify the question, and that can be really useful in helping you to get better at your decision making. Any comments or questions at this point you'd like to add? What are some of the, we'll pause for some questions in a minute. What are some of the things that we need to take into account? So what have you got on your hands at the moment when it comes to, and I'm focusing on managing an agribusiness in these conversations, what have you got there? The analogy that we work with in RCS is a three-legged pot. So this is what an agribusiness is made up of. Up in the pot is the most important resource that you have. The most important animal is the two-legged one, is the people. So we need to think about how effective we are at managing and working with people. In this session, we're talking about decision making as one of the things that we need to help people work through and support them in. The three legs of the pot that support the people within any business are made up with how effective we are at managing our land, how effective we are at managing our production system. So this is your livestock and your crops. This is the bit that you get paid for. And then how effective we are at managing our business, that money story. And if we've got healthy, improving land and good levels of productivity, and we've got the right management going on at a business level, then that gives you the foundation and the balance to support the people in any operation. And each of these four pillars here, the people, the land, the production, and the business, are vitally important. No one is really more important than the other, and we can't neglect any other part of it. And we see a lot of businesses that are, these three-legged pot is out of balance. And as a result, we usually start to see people falling out because we've got a business that's out of whack. And so you'll notice a bit of similarity between these four pillars here and the four webinar topics that we're going to be covering in this series. So we're doing people, land, production, and business. We're not going to be able to cover everything in there, as I mentioned, but we'll give you something to think about in each of those topics. What do we want? What we've observed is that most people, when they're working with us, whether they're coming and doing a grazing for profit school or getting one of us to work, a client to work one-on-one with us, usually there's some sort of business improvement or life improvement that people are chasing. And it might be outcomes such as increasing profit, lowering your cost of production, increasing your operating margin, debt reduction, capital development, or reinvestment back into the business. And you might have other business outcomes that you're looking for. At a life improvement, it could be better communication, improving your communication skills, more family time, less arguments, having a clearer direction, the ability to take holidays, the freedom to choose, being excited with life, an increased level of contentment, or having a purpose and a clear purpose to live by. And you might have a different list there or add things to that. But usually there's some form of business or life improvement and everything that links in with that. Now, if we think about in your operation, down here we've got your production systems. This is your crops and your livestock. And how do we link that? How do we link your production systems to improving business and life? So let's break this out. The first thing we've got is we've got our data coming out of our production systems. You'll have some land data coming out, which could be soil tests, it could be grazing charts. You'll have some production data, which will be yields and production levels. and we'll have our financial data, the money story coming in and out. However, data by itself can be a real distraction. And what we need to do is we need to ask ourselves, and this linked back to one of the points you made before when it comes to decision making, we need to ask ourselves, how do we convert our data into meaningful information? So knowing that you harvested 700 tonnes of barley, that's some production data, but it's quite meaningless unless we bring it back to a yield on a per hectare basis, isn't it? Having lots of reams and reams and reams of individual animal weights by itself is absolutely meaningless until we bring that into a weight gain or we compare that across time. So we've actually got to do something with this. And I found there's a lot of businesses that have a huge amount of data lying around, but it's not taken this crucial next step into something that's meaningful. We've also got the people, this really important but complex creature that runs around in most businesses and makes them happen. And people also contribute to meaningful information. We've got our people metrics that take into account, and anybody managing teams of people, that's important. The big thing that people need to be doing for us also is to clarify where we're going. What's the actual outcome that we're looking to achieve here? What direction? What are the goals we're looking to achieve? What are we trying to tick off here? And it's where we've got clear goals and direction and some meaningful information about where we are or where we want to go. They're the two key ingredients for making a decision. Doesn't mean that the decision making necessarily is easy. You might not like the decision you have to make. However, making a decision becomes a lot easier when we have some information and we know where we're trying to go. And it's when we're making decisions with this platform here that we call this professional management. And this is the balance between the head and the heart, isn't it? So your goals and direction is a bit of the heart. It's a bit about, what's important to us, where do we want to take this business? And the meaningful information is that conversion of data, and that's a bit more of the head. And no one there can be complete for our decision making. It's important that we have a bit of a balance between those two components, the head and the heart. So if you're struggling to make a decision at any point in the future, just pause and ask yourself, well, what's the outcome I want? What does success look like when, as a result of making this decision? Where do we want to be in the future? And just clarify that, jot that down on a piece of paper. And then what information do I need to support that? And if you pause and actually step back and move away from trying to make the decision for a moment in terms of clarifying where you want to go and where you are, then you can come back to the decision quite often and be a bit clearer in making that. Now, how we go about learning. Now, learning is all about incremental change. I'm sure each of you have been to a course or read a book or had a conversation with somebody that's had this brilliant idea. It's a bit harder to turn into practice, isn't it? So taking knowledge and turning it into skills takes time. I think it's important that we do acknowledge that it's just one step at a time. The first stage in adult learning, and a lot of you will have already seen this model, is what we call unconscious incompetence, where you don't know what you don't know. And then the next stage is what we call conscious incompetence, where you know what you don't know. And then the next one we move to is conscious competence, where you know what you know. And then the goal with any skill or anything we're looking to do in our business is unconscious competence. And so to start off with, you might need to stop and think and work out how to do some analysis of your business. And then as you do that more regularly and get more comfortable with it, you just sit down and do it, don't you? It might be a difficult conversation to have with somebody that you're working with or a supplier. And early on, you've got to think about how you might have that conversation. And through time, you become more comfortable with doing that. The reality is that back in these early stages, unfortunately, it takes a bit of work to develop and learn new skills. And that can take some time, which is a limited commodity for us. So it's worth just being conscious and being kind to yourself that every new skill that we want to learn, we've got to go through these stages, and it does take time. And as long as we're progressing our skills in a few areas on a regular basis, then that's the bit that's important, because it takes time to really bed these in. We, in terms of the products that we've developed over the last 30 plus years in RCS, we work on that adult learning model. whether it be our knowledge base here in the schools, the grazing for profit schools, or the business grazing or cropping short courses, and then that development through the coaching and advice we do, and then executive link, the peer development one. Because we recognise it takes time and you do need support to get to that basis. And just, so I want to sum some of this up a bit in terms of decision making. Can be difficult, but we need to break it down to its different components. Sometimes writing it down can really help to clarify where you want to go. And it's also a bit of being kind to yourself. So what's the key thing for decision making? Make the best decision that you can with the information that you have at this point in time. Now, it might sound really simple, but I think it's quite critical at the same time. And particularly if we link it back to decision fatigue, well, unfortunately, we just need to acknowledge that, yep, well, somebody needs to make the decision, and at that point in time, that's actually me. And I might not have all the information, but timing is such an important one. If you need to make a decision today, then all you can do is make the best decision you can with the information you have at this point in time. And then think about next time you might need to make this decision. What do I change between now and then so that I've got more information, particularly meaningful information? One of the quotes I love, and I believe it comes from a gentleman called Peter Drucker, who talks about how timing is not only the most important thing, it's the only thing. And it's far better for us to be approximately right at exactly the right time than to be exactly right at exactly the wrong time. And that's that, we're never completely ready. You might not ever be completely confident. And so that's that bit of confidence behind decision making that we talked about. So let's move now on to talk about a little bit what's going on inside your head and how we think. Now, some of you will have a lot more knowledge on these topics than I, and I'm not professing this to be complete, but it's a nice way of thinking about what's going on. We've actually got three key components to our brain. We've got our reptilian brain, which is the primal part that was first evolved. And then as we have evolved as humankind, we've developed the mammalian brain, which has got the ability to think about emotion, seek out pleasure, avoid pain. And then further on, we've further developed this rational brain, which gives us the logic and thinking. And this part of our brain actually doesn't fully develop until we're in about our mid-20s. And so we've got these three bits, and I want to just break it into two parts. So we'll talk about the reptilian brain and then the more evolved or normal brain that we operate with now. So we think about this reptilian brain. This is that primal aspect, hence the name. What drives this is adrenaline. So this is this fast thinking, and it's external. It's dealing with what's happening around us, and it has a very narrow focus, dealing with that external pressure that's there right now. And as a result, we go into the well-known fight or flight mode. However, I like the work done by Joshua Wenner. He talks about how we've got fight, flight. We've also got freeze and appease. And I think they're quite really relevant for us. And I'm going to bring this back to an agribusiness management context. So we might go into fight or flight, but more often as people, we might go into a freeze, and that's that indecision. I think that's where we get in that real decision fatigue as well. And we also can go into that appease mode. And you see this when you're working with other people where there's too much going on. I might be a bit overwhelmed, and I'm just going to go along with what other people want to do because I don't have the actual energy to do something different. So we go into that appease mode. And by contrast, our more evolved brain, it's slower, it's more logical in its processing. It's where we're doing our planning. It's where we're being quite thoughtful and considered with our thought and action. And it's where we're going through our process of reasoning and considering alternate options. So they're very different paces and different focuses, aren't they, these two aspects? One of the things that's really driving this reptilian brain is adrenaline. So particularly in that fight, flight type scenario, and that's where we are. Adrenaline is pumping into our bodies, which can be quite useful short term, can't it? If you're in a set of yards and you've got a big old bull coming at you to try and give you a sniff, I know for me, there's plenty of times where I've ended up on the top rail going, I'm not quite sure how I got up here so quickly. And so that boost of adrenaline in that moment there and everything else just disappears is quite useful. However, adrenaline over here, if we're trying to operate there, well, it's much less. But if we're trying to make business decisions, this is where adrenaline isn't working for us, because that's where we start to really close in on what's happening. And if we think about decision making, I mean, we asked this question before, but a lot of people struggle to focus in the office. Would that be a fair thing? If you give me a nod if that's the case, where you've been in the office and just actually found it difficult to focus or make a decision with what you've got at hand. Is that anybody else done that, or is that just me? There's a few nods and hands going up. As a result of that, I think this links into that reptilian brain starting to become more dominant and taking over. So we're kicking into that part of the brain that doesn't support how we need our brain to function to make some business decisions. And the term I use with this is getting stuck. Spinning wheels, you can look at it like that, where you're going in there, you've got to do something, and it's almost like you got a flat battery in your head, and just and just it won't quite click into gear, and you just can't seem to get going. By contrast, when you're not stuck, you're in flow. You're really getting into the zone. You seem to get through a lot of work really quickly and seem to be on top of your decision making. Can you picture the two different modes that we're talking about there? So when we're being stuck, what's happening there is that reptilian brain is kicking in for survival, and unfortunately it reduces your capacity to think broadly and logically. So it either reduces, or in some cases, in more extreme cases, you're almost catatonic, it stops. We can be stuck for a moment, and this is really worth thinking about, particularly across time. So we can be stuck making a decision now. I just don't know I don't know what to do, and it might be because we don't know what we're trying to achieve, or it might be because we don't have enough information, or we would like more information to help with that. So we can be stuck in a moment, or we can be stuck for longer periods of time. And that means that we're actually spending days, weeks, or months avoiding making decisions. So there's two different aspects to this that are worth being aware of. And I think the first thing is to try and be the observer of our own behavior to know when we're in this moment there. Because if you can become aware of when you're stuck, then we're going to talk about some strategies that you can use to get unstuck. The first step is to know where you're at. Now, the way we work, and none of this knowledge is mine. I want to acknowledge all the brilliant thought leaders and behind time. So people like Alan Parker and Jill Rigney with some of this work. But if we have stimulus, this pattern that we have is we are given some stimulus. So that might be we need to make a decision, or somebody says something to us, and anybody in a relationship, you've got this pattern of stimulus response. Somebody behaves a certain way or says something, and you just automatically have a response. And that can be really quite useful in some ways. However, there can be moments there where your response actually escalates a situation. And we've all been in conversations or seen conversations where the stimulus might not be kind and the response is not kind either. And we start to escalate up in what's going on. And with hindsight, we look at that and go, I probably could have handled that differently. So we've got this stimulus response pattern that's just underlying who we are. What we want to do is think about, right, how do I interrupt this pattern of behavior? And I'm specifically talking about where you've got this stimulus response pattern, which isn't achieving the result that you'd like, or where you're not operating at your best. So how do we interrupt that pattern of behavior? The first thing we want to do is we want to just insert a pause after the stimulus and before a response. Now that pause might be a microsecond. It might just be this, hang on, just let me catch myself on this before I say something. It might just be just tiny, or it might be a few long, deep breaths because the stimulus might have been a little bit more stimulating for you. So you might just need to really relax yourself back down a bit. But this is that first pause, that is this conscious insert of a pause rather than that automatic response. What we're doing when we're inserting a pause is we're giving ourselves the ability to choose. And it's when you've got the ability to choose your response rather than giving that automatic response that you're putting yourself in more control. And that's that powerful one. So this is a really powerful little tool here to have in your toolbox. And this is the first step is to be aware of it, and then to train yourself across time, just pause for a moment and think about that response. Now, you can't control what other people do, but you can absolutely control what you do on this one. And as I mentioned, it starts off with being the observer of your own behavior. So how did I react in that situation? And be kind to yourself as well. If you've got this pattern, it's really hard to break patterns. It does take time. So if you notice that you're going back into an old pattern, but you're aware of it, that's actually really good. Don't bash yourself up because of it. If you're aware of it and you know that happened, then next time you're going to be more likely to be able to insert that pause and change it. Okay, so knowing that you've done something is actually quite healthy if you interpret it that way. Now, when we're wanting to get unstuck, the big goal with this is we want to be reducing the amount of adrenaline coursing through our veins, which is going to allow us to get back into that logical thought process again. So how are we going to do that? The first thing we've got to do is think about what pattern interrupter can we use. And it's actually having some literal pattern interrupters that can help us to rewire the way we respond to certain situations, which as a result is going to change our state. So shift your state from being that one that just follows its own spot, or where you're stuck and adrenaline is overtaking and you can't make decisions. We want to shift our state, which first and foremost means that you might need to take a mini break from what you're doing. So I'm going to focus on an example here about you are in the office and you need to make some decisions, or you need to get some work done and you just can't get into the rhythm, or you can't find yourself functioning the way that you know you previously might have been able to do. Step one is to have a mini break, which means you first and foremost need to give yourself permission to actually have that little break. Now, I'm going to guess that a lot of you will have done stock work at some point in your life. Now, what happens when you are doing some stock work and you're there and you might be trying to yard up a mob of sheep or cattle or goats or whatever you might be working with, and you're there trying to yard them up and they just won't flow. They just will not flow. They just won't flow through that gate there. What happens if you keep pushing harder and harder and harder? They start pushing back harder and harder and harder and harder, don't they? And what happens to everyone's temperatures? That starts to come up, stress levels come up, the adrenaline levels come up. And as a result, we actually start functioning at a more reptilian type level, don't we? But if we compare that to things just aren't flowing, what happens if you just go and have a drink of water, walk over to wherever you're at your water bottle, just pause for a couple of minutes and come back, when sometimes it's just a couple of minutes, isn't it? Just that little bit of pressure off and then come back into it. A fair bit of the time, things just flow, don't they? Has anyone else experienced that? And I won't ask you because I know you'll have been there. Has anybody experienced the opposite, where you just keep trying to bloody force that point and it just doesn't get there and everyone gets a bit stirred up as a result? So I want you to have that in the back of your head, that we know logically from our past that if we just use that little bit of a break, we can change state, and it becomes quite a useful little pattern. So what we need to do is you just need to clear your mind just a little bit. It's not always possible to completely clear it, so we can just clear it a bit. It's going to put you into a more resourceful state, and that's the goal with this. So there's 5 key ways that I've found that can be useful to help you to get unstuck. 5 key ways that can help you to reduce this adrenaline. The first one is through just good old, simple, old-fashioned essential breathing. It's interesting, you look at a lot of modes of therapy when you get in and read about psychology. A lot of modes of therapy are centralized around breathing patterns and focusing on breathing. And so a couple of ways, and there's plenty of other ones, but one that gets talked about a lot is this box breathing, where what you do is you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and then breathe out for 4 seconds. And then hold for 4 seconds. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. It's pretty simple. It's easy to remember. I like that one myself personally because it's easy to remember and does a couple of things. One, it helps you to get oxygen in, which is your brain must have oxygen to function. So if you ever find yourself needing to make a response or struggling to make a decision, please breathe. You must be breathing. Breathe before you give a response. Another one that gets talked about is this 4-to-6 ratio, where you're breathing in for 4 and out for 6. So I'd suggest try a couple of different ones and work out which one works better for you. I don't think there's anyone that's right or wrong, but it's about focusing on your breathing. That's really important. I won't make you do it now, but I would encourage you to think about that one there. If anyone's watching this recording, chuck pause on and just focus on your breathing. The next one is movement, that physicality of movement. Now, we'll come back to the scenario we're talking about. You're in the office and things just aren't functioning, just aren't working. So what we're going to do, there's a couple of different things. One, you could just stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, just on the spot. Don't have to go anywhere. The other one is you just might go for a walk, just getting out and going for a walk. If you really want to, you can jump on the floor and do some push-ups or do something there. You can inject a lot of energy through squats and push-ups, for example, in a really short space of time. What that does is it just gets your body moving and it helps to change your state. The third option here, and this is really good, is the physical contact with another living being. Now, the beauty of living on farms and stations is that usually we're surrounded by dogs and horses and animals, aren't we? We've got that and some of that. And I defy anybody, regardless of what state you are, to go and give a dog a pat and not feel better. And if you've got horses that are hanging around the house yard, they're just such a beautiful animal to go and talk to. So that physical contact, now it could be with the two-legged animals that are out. Although if the two-legged animal that you're working with is the one that's causing the stress, that might not be an appropriate time. You might just need to think about another strategy there. But that can be, but it's that actual physical contact that does, at a physiological level, change our state. And we can stack some of these together, can't we? So we could focus on our breathing while we're getting up and going for a walk to go out and pat an animal. So we can be stacking a few of these things together. Just like we can do this next one, which is cold water. Now, at an extreme level, we've got your ice baths, which are physiologically quite powerful. But we could simulate that as well, just with cold water. So just going to the sink, getting some cold water and splashing your face is really a powerful way to help you to shift state. If you're out in the paddock, most of the time, hopefully, you'll have a water bottle with you. And so just pouring a bit of water in your hands and doing that there as well is another way to help. Even, I know a lot of you are in pretty cold climates, you're going to get an extra boost by doing that. And so you can use that as an extra tool. One that's not on the list there that I just probably do want to throw in there is the importance of water. I observe so many people that come through and do courses and I work with that simply don't drink enough water. They're not hydrated. Your brain requires, I think 70% of your brain's mass is water. I think, don't quote me the number, but it's something to that effect. Correct me if I'm wrong if you know. And so if we're not hydrated, our brain simply cannot function. And so it's a really important one to keep on top of. Another one that I picked up in my research on this was vocal cords. And so this is the process of singing or humming, or you can, depends on who's around you, you might just go full tilt and belt out a ballad, is another way to shift that state. So music and sound and frequency is really important at a physiological level to us as well. And so listen to some music, sing something, hum something. You can do that whilst you're focusing your breathing, whilst you're going for a walk, after splashing your face to go out and pat the dog. So we can stack all these things together, can't we? And the last one that came out of what I found was grounding. And that's this physical earthing. And I think that we run the risk, and a lot of people in cities, I think this is part of some of the issues that we see, where they are inside a house and they put on their shoes and hop in their car and go to an office and come back. They're never actually touching bare ground against earth and earthing out. And so there's something that's quite important at an energy level for us to earth out. And, you know, it's quite nice walking on nice green grass, isn't it? And bare feet. It's a lovely feeling. And particularly if you've just mown the lawn and you've got that smell of freshly grown grass, that releases some hormones in your body and makes you feel happy as well. So what I've been getting people to do is to take these 6 here and adapt and use them to come up with your own little cheat sheet. So if you can become aware of being stuck, then have a post-it note that might sit on your computer screen using a computer one, or it might sit in your notebook if you carry a notebook, or on your phone. Something that when you find yourself stuck, just write over, if I am stuck, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on box breathing for 1 minute, or I'm going to go and splash my face with cold water, go into a different room, do some breathing. You can use 1, 2, 3, all of them. Don't overthink it. Give it a go. And play with it across time. If you write it in pencil so you can rub it out and do something else with it. It's not a contract, but just muck around with that. And I just wanted to leave you with this little one here. And this is particularly when you're stuck. You might sometimes feel guilty about experiencing joy when others are struggling. However, happiness plays a crucial role during challenging periods. And there's some really interesting research on this one. And it said that focusing on happiness can help solve practical problems in a crisis. And this is just about changing that state again. And some of those things we just talked about can actually help you to shift state. You know, you're going to feel more happy going for a walk and engaging with an animal as opposed to keeping on trying to grind out in that office situation. And there's more and more research now showing that happiness comes from a focus on helping others. And so if you're really stuck, get on the phone and just have a chat to a friend. You know, check in with somebody else, see how they're going. And that can really help what's going on in that situation as well. So to sum up some of the things that we've talked about here, getting things out of your head is really important. Getting it onto paper. Thinking about some of the different processes that we can use, some of those different models that we had up there, that professional management model. Okay, I'm sitting down to make a decision. What's the outcome I want to achieve? What's the meaningful information I need? We talked about being kind to yourself. So if you don't have all the information that you might like to make a decision, if you need to make the decision now, then you probably still need to make it. So make the best decision you can with the information you've got at this point in time. And then we talked about being the observer of your own behaviour and just being aware that the different parts of our brain that can kick in, and then they're not right nor wrong, but each of them play a different role and have a different time when it's useful. So there's times when we need that reptilian brain to kick in and help us to get out of a jam. And there's times when we actually need our more evolved brain to support us to make, in some cases, some multi-million-dollar decisions or some big decisions. And so if you can be aware about when you're getting stuck and develop your own cheat sheet around this, it might just help you just to shift that state a little bit and be a little bit more productive with that time. Because the only thing I've found is that, well, not the only, but one of the key things I've found is that staying stuck and giving yourself a hard time never results in you getting unstuck. So you've got to do something a bit different, don't we?